Who is the God that is ruling over us at this present moment is a question that I've been pondering, and I want to open it to you in case our interaction in the comment section might bring to a solution. But I want to present the question, deepen the question, and most importantly, I want to present a tool that has proven helpful to me in understanding Greek paganism. Suffice to say that paganism is not the right term. We've made a number of videos explaining that, but to the degree that you understand, it's good for now. The aspect of Greek paganism, as with all paganism, that is the most troubling, perhaps, is polytheism. The idea that there are many gods, or many gods, as one book on Hinduism like to present it. And that aspect is obviously troubling Christians and Muslims, monotheists par excellence, and it's also troubling some self-proclaimed modern pagans. Now, to my surprise, judging from a few of the comments, the answer to this criticism was to refute it by accepting it and by saying that no, the ancient Greeks seemed like they were worshipping many gods, but underneath it all they were worshipping one big nous, one big divine mind, as expressed by a lot of the Neoplatonists, for example. What is forgotten, and what we have to stress on almost every episode, is that between Homer and Plotinus, more than 1,000 years of history had elapsed. It's almost like mixing something said by Rousseau and someone said by Foucault or Derrida or one of these postmodernists, and saying, the French believed, and you mix one sentence from Rousseau, one sentence of Foucault, and somehow that makes sense. That's wrong in at least two aspects. One is that your average Frenchman doesn't necessarily share the ideas of his intellectuals. And number two, about 500 years of history, actually less, about 250, 300 years of history had elapsed between these two. Imagine 1,000 years of history and how different the ideas, the meanings, even the words had become, right? To defend Greek paganism is to defend polytheism in its own right. And I want to open up a question and present a tool that has helped me to understand Greek polytheism. And that tool comes by way of an image. And that image is the image of the starry heavens. When the ancients said stars, they meant, in most cases, all the planets, including the sun and the moon. And then the starry heavens, which perhaps they imagined like some kind of firmament, like some kind of roof above us. It's in that context that Dante ends his Paradiso with the love that moves the sun and other stars. And indeed, he was ascending in that ladder, celestial ladder of planets, going from one planet to the other, from Venus to Mercury to Mars, each being imbued with a god. Venus, the goddess Aphrodite; Mars, the goddess Ares of war; Mercury is Hermes. And the ancients understood that planets would correspond to their deities. But the idea that I want to present is that a planet or a star is the dominant gravitational field of its area, of its domain. Okay? You might have heard, for instance, that Pluto had been declassified as a planet. I think it happened about 15 years ago. What that means is that scientists now believe that objects that are near Pluto are not moved by Pluto. Rather, the object and Pluto are moved by another object, perhaps the sun, which is stronger, which exerts the dominant gravitational force. Gods are gods to the degree that they are the dominant gravitational force of their area, of their domain. You fall into a god like a comet falls into the orbit of a planet and dances, moves around its rhythms. Remember that the ancient Greeks worshipped many, many gods, but they worshipped each god at their time. Remember how in at least ancient Greek mythology, it's almost like a staple where one god can never undo what another god had done. Hera would avenge one of Zeus's lovers by transforming her into an animal or outright killing her. Zeus could not undo that, although he was, let us say, superior in this rank of the Olympian gods. He couldn't transgress this idea. One planet cannot dominate the field of another while the other still remaining a planet, right? And so with domains, you want to think of a situation. What is a situation, really? Imagine you go on a business trip and you meet a girl and you fall in love, spend a wonderful weekend with her, and then Monday she needs to board on that plane again, fly back home to her boyfriend. Wow, you're in a new situation, right? A situation, as presented here, is essentially an organization of events that were random or insignificant before. Now they orbit a different center. Now your brain is racing. Airplane tickets, days off work. Are you doing the work that you want to be doing? Should you just leave it all behind and run off with that girl? Prices, money. Are you making enough? Should you be making enough? Are there enough days in the calendar? All these things were the same before. The plane tickets had the same price 5 days ago. Your days of work were probably the same. All these things that you never considered were probably the same, but now they're organized differently, and it's that organization that gives them meaning. To say it more formally, the plane ticket, her country, and your days off acquire their meaning in relation to their distance from a new center, your love affair. Everything you do and you think, it's now dominated by a new center. You fell in love like you fall into the domain of a god. And you have to dance in his orbit until you escape. As with people, so with eras, historical eras. The 1960s that so changed the face of Europe were also dominated by a god. Dionysus, of course. The 60s were purely Dionysiac. I even remember a cultural critic, Camille Paglia, saying so explicitly in one of her books. The 60s were Dionysiac. They fell into the orbit of Dionysus. And this orbit begins with a party. Wild and ecstatic and maddening and sexual. The breaking down of barriers. Dionysus is Lysios, the dissolver. He dissolves barriers. Sex for everyone, old, young, black and white, doesn't matter. Cultural barriers, racial barriers, age barriers. Dionysus dissolves all that, and the 60s went on to dissolve those barriers as well. The drugs that the 60s used, LSD and psychedelics, were Dionysiac par excellence. They're the drugs of dissolving your ego, dissolving you into the greater cosmos. That is the Dionysiac ecstatic experience. Ecstasy, the word itself, means to stand out of yourself, stand out of you, the you that is represented by your identity card. You stand out and join the great universe. But what begins with a party usually ends in tragedy. And that is what is often forgotten about the 1960s. That once you're dominated by the orbit of Dionysus, you have to go full circle and into the dark part of that orbit. Because what began as free sex ended in broken families, single mother households, and a generation of fatherless young men. What began as an occasional drug use turned into a drug abuse for many. even the music itself, what began as the rock and roll of the 60s, changed and changed and changed until it culminated in the death rhythms of the grunge scene of Seattle during the 90s. And notice how all these people committed suicide. Many of them, of course, not all, many of them. Some died from drug overdoses, which are often covert suicides in a way. And so the 60s danced around. If they understood this polytheistic aspect, at least in the way that I just described, perhaps they would have been informed by the true nature of Dionysus, which is dual. It begins ecstatically and ends in the total dissolution. It's the fire that burns, the fire that consumes everything you hate about society, about its rules, until when it's done with that, it never stops burning, until it consumes you and itself. And that is exactly what is portrayed in Dionysus' tragedy, The Bacchae, which is perhaps the last notable tragedy to have ever been written before Shakespeare. There we see exactly that, the ecstatic ending with the destruction of the city. Dionysus was not worshipped in the city. So it's all fine to pay lip service, but a profound understanding, I believe, of polytheism is about understanding the nature of each god without merging them into the one great nous, which lacks taste, lacks flavor. It's not represented in this bush or in this cloud or in this woman or in this business deal. It doesn't link directly. It's so big, it's so vague, it represents everything, which is why it represents nothing. While a specific god, Dionysus, Hera, Zeus, they represent specific things, and you know when you're dancing to their rhythms, and it's by understanding their nature that you can conclude that once you are bound to their orbit, you have to experience the whole 360 of their nature, both good and bad. And so, with all this, we're led to the question with which we began. If every era, every situation, every movement has its God, it's obvious that lately we've been experiencing a very strange turn of events. Anything from the advent of the COVID period to the last presidential elections in the United States, wars breaking out, to AI, that is quite an unprecedented piece of technology. All these things could be a random, but if truly one is a pagan, it is a very genuine question to ask, who is the God that is ruling over this present moment, where all the weirdness, all the randomness are ordered around an orbit and acquire their meaning in relation to a center? I don't know who that God is, which is why I'm making that video. But I think it's a genuine question, a heathen question, and a very helpful question. Because just like in the 60s, as long as we are bound by the dominance of this God, we will experience everything he has to offer until we break free. So I'd love to open this conversation. I hope this image helped you as it has me. So always, we do rely on the kindness of strangers. Please consider subscribing on Patreon and clicking subscribe and sharing this video. Thank you very much.